ठीक। Right here.
What you want? I don't know you like that. Come
Well,
so stay over here and if I need.
Good afternoon. And thank you for being with us this Friday afternoon. Those person, and also those who will be joining us remotely. We are momentarily about to connect. Are we not, Mr. Co-Chair?
We certainly are working on it.
At which time our first speaker will be, well, we have panels today. First panel is DECD, headed up by Commissioner Alexandra Dom. And the second panel that will be before us following DECD will be the auditors, headed up by John Garagosian and Clark Chapin, two familiar names to all of us. And are we live?
Right there. I don't have.
And Commissioner Dom, are you with us?
yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, let's keep trying that.
Okay. And how's that for audio?
Audio's good. And
No video.
where's our video?
Commissioner Dom, could you please try speaking one more time?
I will keep speaking
There
until
we
you.
are.
Okay, good.
And so, Madam, you have the floor
Thank you.
for this, I think, your maiden voyage with us on the first time reporting on the DECD annual report. And so we're welcome to you and you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I apologize for not being there in person. I thought the hearing was fully remote, and otherwise I would have been sitting there and doing this doing it much more easily for all of us. But it is what it is, and so I'm gonna jump.
Enjoying your background.
You well, I appreciate that. At least I give you a busy, bright background to spice up the afternoon. So I wanted to, it's a dense report. You all have had the opportunity to look at the way we've analyzed our success over 2022 and our various programs. So I thought hopefully a helpful way to start off would be to just give a brief summary of how the report is structured and the different programs that we cover. And then also a brief economic update. Does that sound helpful, Madam Chair?
Yeah, that's fine. You may proceed. Yep.
And of course, I'll stay at a very high level for the introduction, and then my team, many members of my team here to answer questions on all the specifics, and we look forward to answering.
Madam Commissioner, if you just want to quickly introduce us to your team, because we do have some new members in your executive team.
Good thinking. So we have Deputy Commissioners Paul Robertson and Rob Hodling both on the line. You guys give a little wave. We have George Norfleet, who's Executive Director of Business Development. Kyle Abercrombie, our Director of Legislative Affairs and Chief Administrative Officer. Nandika Prakash is our economist. Kara Sen runs our compliance department, and Kara and Nandika really do the meat of the annual report, and we'll get into any technical questions that folks have. Liz Shapiro runs our Council on Arts. Sorry, my screen is blinking, and which also includes the State Historic Preservation Office. And I think that's it for. If I miss anyone, holler. No.
I will quickly holler. This is Kyle Abercrombie, Chief Administrative Officer. We also have with us our brand new Director of Government Affairs, Katie Stark-Gardner. So if you want to give a quick.
Today is Katie's first day, so I apologize.
What was the area?
Director of Government Affairs.
Oh, director. Oh, all right. Welcome, Katie. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry about that, Katie. I'll work better on the warm welcome next time. So starting off, I'll start off with the economic update. Lots of exciting news, and I think welcome questions on any of these areas. But I wanted to highlight just some 2022 metrics that are really strong for the state. One is a couple weeks ago, GDP growth, real GDP growth, was announced by the Bureau of Labor, by the Census Bureau. That was for the entirety of 2022, and Connecticut really exceeded expectations in that department. We were up 2.4% annually in 2022 compared to a national average of 2.1%. So we're above the average. That's step number one. And we're also above the regional average. We frequently compare ourselves to New England rather than looking at the whole country, since we have a lot more in common with our neighboring states sometimes than the states farther flung. And so we beat both the national average and the regional average significantly with that 2.4% increase in real GDP in 2022. So that's something that, sometimes it's hard to know if we're moving the needle when we're all these programs every day making lots and lots of small decisions. And the way we kind of look to see how it's adding up is to see what are the aggregate numbers, what is the real economic activity that we're generating for the state, and really thrilled to see that 2.4% above average for 2022. We also added 30,000 new jobs over the course of calendar 2022. And, again, there's inflows and outflows, companies leaving, companies coming, companies expanding, companies shrinking. And so we really want to look at those aggregate numbers, and the aggregate increase of 30,000 new jobs from 2022 is a good statistic to show that we're headed in the right direction. And then lastly, the population data, the Census Bureau tracks it slightly, it tracks it July to July, so it's not as comparable of a calendar year 22, but in 21 and 22, in the two periods that they most recently tracked, the state added 30,000 new residents. That's net new residents. So again, headed in the right direction, and that reverses a historic trend of population decrease in the state. And we're, combining these three elements we're feeling optimistic and feeling like 2022 was a strong year for our agency. And certainly we don't just do it alone. Certainly we do it along our economic programs are all alongside many of the administration's additional agencies and with the help of the legislature, of course. So that's from the economic point of view. And then I'll just briefly go through how the annual report is structured. And but I'm not going to dive in too deep, and because it could take all day, and you all can let me know which areas you'd like to hone in on with specific questions. The way we structure this report, there are 4 key sections, and that corresponds to sort of the type of program and the way that we evaluate them. The first section is specifically tax credits. So this is a very specific kind of tool, and there's a handful of tax credits that are mentioned within. You have the angel investor tax credit, you have R&D tax credits, et cetera. So that is the first section, and it's in terms of it's the first section. It has a lot of the math, the upfront math, but it's certainly only a portion of the tools that we have in our toolbox. We're moving more and more towards focusing more and more on community development, which is not done through tax credits. So that was section 1 was tax credits. Section 2 is what we call economic development programs and activities. These are not tax credits in particular. They are potential grants, loans, other tools that are largely going towards businesses to grow those businesses, to grow jobs, to grow the economy. And some examples of those would be our MAA program, our Small Business Express program, and our Boost program are good examples of category in this number 2 category. Number 3 is the community development programs. I mentioned we're emphasizing those more and more. Place-based investment is a big priority for Governor Lamont and for DECD. And we have a handful of community development programs. Those largely take the form of grants, although a couple other targeted tools in the bucket as well. Some grant programs you'll be familiar with in that community development bucket are the Communities Challenge program, relatively new. Community Investment Fund, also relatively new. Much older is our Urban Act portfolio, which we administer in this community development bucket. And those are projects that are all up and down the state that receive Urban Act funds in order to do capital projects. The last section of the report just talks about employment indicators and other economic indicators, and happy to get into the details on any of those, but tried to keep the headlines at the top of the meeting because I think they are strong. And so wanted to make sure we focus on those right away, those top line indicators. So I'm going to pause there. And like I said, we are here with them to answer any and all of your questions and look forward to hearing what you thought of the report.
Yes, thank you, Madam Commissioner. I think what we will do is hold our questions so that we can collectively proceed with them after we've also heard from our second panel, which would be our auditors who are here in person with us. And it's so good to see you, other than going in the walkway.
Yeah, it's nice to be back in person again.
And if you can introduce your panel, Mr. Garagosian, that would be.
I will. I want to just make sure my partner, Clark Chapin, is on remotely.
Okay. Do we have Clark?
So
I am. Go ahead.
hello, Clark. How are you?
Hello, John, Madam Chair.
And we're also joined by Natasha Freitas, who's the supervisor of our Department of Economic and Community Development Audit team, and Brian Botticelli, who's been with us on before these committees on several occasions. He's done almost all the work on these reviews of the DECD annual reports. So we're pleased to be here to talk about our reviews. And although the specific topic of today's hearing is the 22 annual report, our testimony also links to our reviews of the 2018 and 2019 annual reports, which included 5 recommendations. Our evaluation of the 2020, 2021, and 22 annual reports resulted in 3 repeat recommendations. We identified a few significant errors. However, we have identified fewer errors than in the past. Overall, DECD is doing a much better job with this report. And, from when we started. So we're happy to report that. Because of the timing of the way when they released the report and when we're able to do our auditing, we've only done a partial review of the 22 annual report. We've spent upwards of about 1,000 hours on this particular review already. So we focused on the accuracy of the information in the report and whether it included all the required information regarding the DECD portfolio. We also looked at the 2020, 21, and 22 years, and we also evaluated the remaining requirements in a separate performance audit, which we issued last April. Now, our review of the 2022 annual report disclosed that DECD did not include analyses of CI administered programs, estimated effects on the state economy, or whether the programs met their statutory programmatic goals. And that's again, a repeat recommendation. In addition, DECD didn't recommend whether these programs should be continued or modified or repeated. We also found a few understatements and overstatements of information in the reports. So if you want to get into the granular details of what our review, we have the auditor did the work here with us. I also want to say that we're in the process of finishing up a performance audit of the film tax credit program, which we expect to issue in the next few months. And we're happy to answer any specific questions you may have.
Thank you very much, John. And so while you are before us now, maybe we can have a few points of clarification with regard to your summary. And thank you for having your team here. And if it's Brian who would be point on this, maybe we'll go there first. And that is with regard to, so yes, duly noted. I think we've turned the page significantly from the audit, which had a significant multiple duplicate overcounting in terms of jobs and programs and so forth. And I do notice, Commissioner, the footnotes throughout the report, which identify the fact where there could be a duplicate counting and so forth. So that's very important so that we are dealing with clean numbers and we have a good assessment of, our investments and their yield. But Brian, if you could talk about the issues, well, number one, I will say that for me anyway, it is a concern that we are not getting an analysis here on the CI programs and performance. And the truth be, if there is some other venue for that or designated reporting requirement, then please share that with me. But otherwise, this is the forum and the time that we should be doing this. And it should be very much a part of our discussion of overall economic development performance in the state. So I would like to make sure as we go to the next round that that is incorporated and we make some additions in view of that. But Brian, if you could just talk about any more specifics you have with the UIR and then of course the brownfields, which I think we're all very interested in view of the fact that we have been working on significant legislation on this, and it is so pivotal at the point where we are now, about to hopefully finish our Transfer Act work and also try to leverage federal dollars, which will now be available through the Federal Infrastructure Act. So in view of that, I find the brownfields initiative to be critical. But go ahead, Brian.
Okay, sure. So for the urban tax credits, that's specifically related to one of the companies that was awarded URA tax credits. DECD had done a job review as part of the contractual requirements. They did not meet all the job requirements. In their internal records, it was noted that the maximum award was reduced from 15 to 5 million. However, it just was not reflected in the table in the report. That's what that issue is. As far as
can I
yep, sure.
And ask if DECD would like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think, sure. I think in this case, this one is a clerical error where our internal records were correct, but the report just didn't reflect the update. And just very important to note, and Brian didn't suggest otherwise, but very important to note that it's not as if the wrong amount of money was distributed. It was just the wrong amount of maximum potential funds or what was listed on the report.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there any follow on?
Yeah, so that's accurate as far as that, because the table does disclose the maximum amount awarded and the amount earned. They didn't disclose in the end. They hadn't earned any yet. It's just the maximum possible of the contract just because they didn't meet all the job requirements. They said they did a job review. They determined it should have been reduced just in this specific table, just the number didn't get changed. And you also asked about brownfield. So I do
Yes.
want to point out it's specifically for fiscal year 21. As John noted, we reviewed 20, 21, and 22 with a focus on 22 as far as the overall portfolio. This error and the percentage errors are specifically to the fiscal year 21 activity. There's the same setup in 22 as far as they disclose projects just awarded in the fiscal year and then a 10-year portfolio. So these percentages are specifically for projects disclosed that were just awarded in 21. The percentage effects on the actual total portfolio are significantly smaller. It's just because there were only a handful of projects and this one had a lot of non-DCD funds. For the 2021 report, the errors would be 0.68% for investment, 1% for non-DCD funds, and less than 1% for the total leverage. It's just the way the numbers shook out specifically for fiscal year 2021. However, the effect on the total portfolio is quite small. This is the result of just one contract that wasn't captured. We reviewed the accounting system and determined they were missing one contract that was awarded in 2021.
Thank you. If the commissioner wanted to make any comments, now is the time.
I totally agree with that assessment. It was left, the one contract was left out in error, and luckily it made a fairly small difference in the totals, but these are, we agree that these errors were made.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Yes, Mr. Co-Chair, Senator Mesker, Representative.
Thank you very much. Just as a follow-up, in terms of, I think you short-circuited my question because the magnitude of the oversight or the lack of one contract is not that meaningful. I guess, Commissioner, it would be helpful to talk about what, if you have the figures available, it's for the public, just to repeat what the magnitude of the leverage is between the brownfields investments and the amount of funds that you deploy for brownfield investments, so we get the public an idea of what the magnitude of the change is, because I know within the House and I believe the Senate, in our joint group, we're looking at an increase allocation potentially of 10 million for each of the 2 years. So what's the magnitude of the leverage you're seeing with brownfield investments? Do you have those figures?
Yes, I'm flipping through my pages, but if I know that for 2022, for fiscal year 2022, the leverage was $4 of outside investment for every $1 of DECD investment. The leverage is significantly higher if you look at the full 10-year portfolio, which is what I'm trying to flip for right now. But it's upwards of $10 of outside money for every $1 of state money over the whole brownfields portfolio, and $4 for the last fiscal year 22, $4 of outside for every $1 of state money.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and sorry, this is Kyle. I found the leverage ratio for the past 10 years, which is 13.63.
Yeah, that's closer to the number that we were familiar with.
Yes, page 37 in the report. I apologize. Of course, my flipping was not working, but yeah, historically it's been 13, and just in fiscal 22 it was 4. And the difference between those numbers is, it varies widely by project, and so it's good to look at the 10-year average. That's just much more information and much more predictive of future programs. Honestly, 4 is still a great number that we're happy with. Every time we can invest $1 and get 4 in from outside, we're happy with that, but would expect future years to be closer to that 10-year average.
And as we've spoken in the past, Madam Chair, with your permission, as we've spoken in the past, I think a measurement of unmet demand, we'll be looking for that in future reports and commentary, just to make sure that we are satisfying. I mean, this is brownfields, this is restoring properties to the tax rolls, increasing economic activity. So I want to make sure that we have the appropriate sized brownfield remediation fund. So anything you can do to help us on that measurement would be very appreciated.
We can follow up with you. It's easy to know the projects that applied and were not funded. We have that record. Harder to estimate the projects that didn't apply because perhaps they didn't think enough money was available or for some other reason. So hard to know that negative, but we can certainly get you the numbers of folks that applied and were not granted funds.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Just a point of clarification. So this past year, we had a 4-to-1 ratio leverage. How does that compare to other years? Is that a dip?
Yes, it's a dip. The 10-year average was 13 from fiscal year 2013 to fiscal year 2022. So 4 is definitely a dip from previous years, given the previous average of 13. I don't have in front of me, but we could get you a list. We could get you an annual leverage ratio for the 13 to 12 for each year. It's just in the report in front of me. It's lumped into one 10-year total, but we certainly have it by year and could get that to you.
We're just curious as to why, and I would like to see that trajectory, what that slope looks like.
Yeah, the reason for the ups and downs in this number is just that the projects vary so significantly, and sometimes you have one project that really moves the needle. You could have a project where brownfields is putting in $1 million, and it's not inconceivable that the private sector would be bringing in $50 million. There are projects of that nature where they're really mega projects and there's a small grant going in. On the flip side, there are projects where if it's a particular community investment that maybe is sponsored by a municipality and not by a developer, those are rare because we do typically like to have a private sector partner at the table. But there are some where there's no private sector partner at the table, and so then the leverage would be 0. And so you get a wide spread of the different leverage ratios between the different projects. And so if you have one big project in one year that happens to be on one side of that big spread, it can move the average significantly, which is why it's good to look at the 10-year average to evaluate more comprehensively.
And I know this is your expertise and this is from where you come. So I accept this as gospel. But I also, having said that, we every year have exhausted the brownfields fund, if you will. Can you comment on that and what you envision in the future in terms of, opportunities with, federal money now on the table for brownfields, as well as, and I keep saying this, maybe it's going to happen sooner than I hope, the completion of our transition from Transfer Act to release-based model, Commissioner.
So you're right that we have exhausted the brownfields funds over the past, since I've been in the role, since 2020, since I've been running this program, we have exhausted the funds and there has been demand that exceeded the available funds. So to the earlier question about unmet demand, there is unmet demand out there because there are folks that we are turning away. It's not at the magnitude of some of our other programs like the Community Investment Fund, where we were only able to fund 10% of the demand for 10% of the demand of applications, or our Communities Challenge Fund, where we were only able to meet about 25% of the demand. In brownfields, we're meeting anywhere between 50 and 70% of the demand for the rounds that have come through in the past few years. So it's not an extreme ratio there, but there certainly is unmet demand, and we'll get you those figures.
And we'll get there on the CIF and the other ones. I would like to invite my co-chair and colleagues. They have questions at this point. Yes. Ranking member, Senator Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, the audit made reference to CI not submitting their estimates. Can you, for the last for last 3 years. Can you speak to why that wasn't submitted?
They publish their own annual report, is my understanding, and so they are that is the way in which we all believe we were fulfilling this obligation, is that CI is evaluating their own programs and publishing their own annual report. I believe it's linked in our annual report as well. Their annual report is linked in our annual report.
So I guess the follow-up question is, who reviews the report? If it's not the auditors.
I don't know the answer to that.
Could you see that they submit their reports to the auditors, please?
Yeah, we will follow up on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Martin. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this doesn't specifically relate to the auditors, but is a question in general. Just looking at your annual report, Commissioner, with both Community Challenges Grant and CIF, I know with the other programs, we're looking for metrics for success. Have you established any metrics as we go forward? I realize both these programs are in their infancy, but in terms of what you're looking for in terms of job creation, economic development, are there specific metrics that you hope these projects will fulfill?
Thank you for the question. And yes, it's a little early to be evaluating, but it is not too early to be thinking about how we will evaluate in the future. And so it's a great question. I think job creation is something we will track for both of those projects, but is not the primary goal for those programs, but is not the primary goal of the programs, given that they're really about physical investments and about downtown environments. And for the most part, livable housing environments is the majority of the use of the funds for, not the majority, but is a big part of the use of the funds for both of those programs. So some metrics that we track grand list improvement. So that's an important way in which we evaluate the applications. What is the potential grand list improvement that will result from the investment? And we will be able to track that in the historically, because grand lists are public, obviously, and we have all the parcel information. So we'll be able to track success that way. We're also tracking the percentage of awards that are going into distressed communities. That's an important goal of both of those programs, is to be making an impact in distressed communities. We're also tracking leverage. So just like we track for brownfields, leverage is a really important part of both CIF and CCC to make sure we're getting good bang for our buck, so to speak. And one more metric that's a little bit nuanced within that leverage point is it's not just leverage of bringing in outside capital. We also look for something on CCC specifically. We also look for match from the actual applicant, because sometimes an applicant will come and they're bringing in a lot of outside capital from banks or from outside investors, but we like to see that the actual applicant has match. They're putting their own money in so that we know that they're really invested. And if the thing goes sideways, they're in trouble just the way we're in trouble. So that's another sub point there that we track very closely, especially on Communities Challenge.
Please proceed.
Quick follow-up, Madam Chair. So I know you mentioned that both the Community Challenge Grant and CIF were heavily oversubscribed. I know in conversations with Matt Pugliese, there was input into why a particular project may not have been successful. Obviously, some people would like to have a second bite at the cherry or the apple. Have you seen applicants who are coming back, and what have we had 2 rounds, and certainly CIF? Do you see an ability for those unsuccessful applicants to fix their applications and be successful in a subsequent round?
Yes, that is. You see me looking off into space because I'm trying to remember if we have any specific examples of folks that were able to do that, apply in round 1 and get rejected and then apply in round 2. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I suspect there are at least 1 or 2. But the conceptual philosophical answer to your question is absolutely. That is definitely there is a path, and we walk them through how to reapply. We actually make available a streamlined reapplication process so they don't have to do the whole thing all over again. So we're very open to reapplications, and I'll follow up with you if I can think of I'll figure out if there were any, but it's the plan for you reapply, and we give them additional feedback to facilitate that.
Thank you. Thank you. And yes, next time we'd love to see you in person. It's much more fun.
I
Thank you.
know, I apologize. I did not realize. I thought we would all be virtual. Otherwise I would be there.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Cheeseman. I just would like to make a footnote at this point, and to you, John, we are handicapped here because we don't have the benefit of the auditor's report on DECD. We do have, your page or so written testimony here, but the report we have not been able to access. And my understanding is that that is supposed to be sent to the tri-committee. It seems like it may have been sent to finance, but we cannot access it. But the other two committees have not been in receipt of it.
Of our testimony today.
No, your audit report.
That is the challenge that we had, and I talked about it a little bit earlier. Because of the timing, the way the legislation was really originally envisioned, we would potentially issue the reports as part of our regular audit of the department. As a result, we haven't issued that final report yet because they just haven't had time to do the review. The report came out of DCD a little bit late, and we just didn't have the time to do the complete report. It's just a question of our hours and availability to do it. So, I mean, I know last year, for instance, this hearing was in June. But it's kind of a kind of disconnect in the statutes as the original legislation was enacted, that we really don't have the. Yep, and Brian might want to add something.
I'd like to add, we've reviewed all the numbers. It's just a matter of going through the levels of review. Everything that's in the testimony. This is all the data that's going to be in the report. It'll just be our normal format. But as far as all the issues, they are identified here. Now, the first bullet point will be the repeat of the first finding from the prior report. The next two, that's the repeat of the second finding from the prior report. The last two repeat of the third finding from the prior report. As John mentioned, there were two findings in our last audit, and those are not being repeated, but everything is in here. It's just as far as going through the normal steps of our process and the quality control, and then giving a chance to DC to formally respond to our findings, while they're aware of all the exceptions beforehand. But it's just a matter of going through these closing steps, just we're not able to actually issue the report. But everything, as far as any errors we identified, this is everything that's going to be reported in our final report.
Well, thank you for that, Brian. And I appreciate, and maybe we've got to do some refinement here of the calendar, John. And so if we can circle back after this, it is true that last year was June. Sometimes it's just, when we can, quite frankly, get all of our committee colleagues together. But we really need to get in sync with, the report date that comes out of the department and, the window for you all to do your thing. The importance, Brian, of course, you've delineated, what the findings would be. It gives this committee the blueprint in terms of, really synthesizing the information. So, that's the value of it. But I hear what you're saying. We're going to have to do, another look-see on this and, clean it up. Yeah.
And I might add, I just saw the information. I just got the information yesterday. So, I mean, we're really on a tight schedule in terms of our workload. And obviously we're in a different place from where we were when the legislation was enacted. So it would be important for us to know where, obviously we're going to hone in on where we think the problem areas are, but it would be important for us to get a new perspective, updated perspective of where we are now, because we're not having the same issues that we had in 2017. So, it'd be good for you to inform us where you want us to look and where you think the problem areas are.
Hear you. Thank you. Representative Horn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, just as a clarifying question, given the various reports we just referred to, you referred a minute ago to the film and digital tax credits in particular, and then audit you're doing on those. That's distinct from the full report you're talking about here.
Yeah, yes, that's a separate performance audit report. The original legislation had us doing an audit of a freestanding program. And because of, quite frankly, the change in administration and direction of the department, the pandemic, and other issues, we are finishing up that report now, and we expect to issue it in the next few months.
Okay, thank you. And then this maybe is more of a question for the commissioner, and it draws on a conversation I think we've started before, but it's a general one, but with in particular reference to the digital and film tax credit. There's a comment in your report just noting that because you don't have job creation data tied to the tax credit, and because of the intent of it, but there's general reference to particular tax credits, but specifically this one, that because you don't have enough data to really analyze it, internally yourself, you're limited in the information. And I just wanted to ask you to flesh that out a little bit so that we have the opportunity to think about what kind of data we ought to be requiring those who participate in the program to submit.
Perfect. Thank you for the question. And yeah, I appreciate your thought partnership on this in previous conversations. It is definitely a challenge and folks have noted a difference in our methodology from the last time DECD evaluated this tax credit to today. And the difference in methodology really comes down to the availability of information that we have, and specifically jobs information. So in previous annual reports, we were not making any assumptions around jobs created. We were simply using the amount spent. And we know the amount spent because that's the amount upon which folks are asking for a credit. So we know that amount, and we were using simply that amount to evaluate the economic impact. And it was when we compared that to the results of the independent study, the Olsberg study, which was commissioned by the legislature and published last year, the results of our analysis, which we knew was missing inputs, and their analysis, which is was their own different approach. The difference was so great between the outcome and the conclusions of those two methods that we really felt that it warranted triple, quadruple checking and looking at the way to assess this credit. And so we came up with the way that we're evaluating it this year, which again, we do not have the jobs data. Nothing changed from 2019 to today in terms of what jobs data we have. So in all of these cases, we're just making estimates. But whereas in the past, we were not making an estimate we were not having an estimate on jobs created as one of the inputs to the model, this year, we did make an estimate as to how many jobs we think are directly resultant from the tax credit, and then ran an economic analysis of the revenue to the state as a result of that number of jobs. That was an assumption. I'm happy to talk through how we got to that assumption, but to address your question, which I know I've had a long winding way to get there, but to specifically address your question, we would love to have more accurate job data of which jobs are directly resultant from the tax credit, so that we can make sure that our analysis is not over or under assessing or giving more or less credit to the tax credit for job creation in the state than is really accurate.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, because I mean, particularly in light of this particular tax credit, there's, in the broader marketplace, there's news from New York about what they're giving out and whether we're entering an arms race with them, or whether we need to be more competitive, and whether it's actually generating the kind of benefit. Obviously, we have to make decisions about that before we will have the full audit report and all of that, apparently. But I appreciate your partnership in working on how we can help ensure that we're generating the kind of data that we need in order to assess the actual value of these credits and others. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Jason. thou her. So you've got as we speak.
Yes, I need to dash off to FAC. Thank you, first of all, everyone, for your presentation this morning. I look forward to seeing the full audit report. That's my old background in audit for Coopers and Lybrand in the early 90s. Just wanted to follow up on some of the loans that the DECD issues, what the sort of repayment is on those, if we have bad debt. And have you done an analysis on that sort of information?
Yes, thank you. So
I was
probably
actually referring to the auditors,
sure.
but
Sorry.
if they've done an analysis, because in the report, you just have a section on the actual loans done. I don't know if there is something I maybe have missed that DEC did, but I was just wondering more of the auditors, because I know a few years ago we had some issues, and so just wanted to follow up on that.
Sure. As far as loans, as part of our review of the annual report, we view it as part of the portfolio and compare it to the loan system that DECD uses. We did not identify any errors there. There weren't any missing loans in the portfolio. As far as anything beyond that, we don't do any further as far as what's required under the statute related to this specific report. We do review loans and their completeness as part of the state's ACFR, the state financial, which we do every summer. But as far as this, that's the extent of our review, is just reviewing the completeness, that they're not missing any contracts. We do review as part of the impact analysis, which is my fourth bullet point. This specifically related to repayment of loans for the Small Business Express program. The whole reason for this error is just they incorrectly included loan repayments for the Recovery Bridge program. The footnote in the table says it's not supposed to, which is the correct approach. They just forgot to back it out of their number from their loan system. That's what it is for. But that's really the only error I found at all related to the loans in our review.
So in terms of any doubtful debts or bad debts, has that been done as part of your review?
Sure.
Things
So
that
the
people
other
are worried
issue we had as far as findings in our prior report, our fifth finding was related to suggestions we had that we thought would provide more useful context to the loan portfolio. We dropped that finding because in the 22 annual report, they're now reporting on the amount forgiven and the amount that's considered uncollectible on the loan. So that is now in there. So that's why
Okay.
it's not in our results.
Got it. I see that. That's really helpful. In terms of the and this second question is for DECD and Commissioner. Thank you again for this report. It's really helpful. I know I haven't had a full time to go through it as much as I'd like, and I will probably spend some more time after session's over. But I do want to follow up on the CIF program in terms of what sort of metrics are you all using to measure the success of the CIF program so that we can be educated as legislators how effective this is going forward?
Sure. Yeah, just to review the items, we're looking at grand list increase. We're looking at percentage of awards made in distressed communities. We're looking at the outside leverage that's coming from outside partners. And something I didn't mention before, but certainly should have, is the number of housing units that are created and the cost per housing unit. So we want to make sure we're being efficient with funds. That goes also for other square footage. So if it's not housing units, we'd like to make sure we're incentivizing or subsidizing the creation of the community space or whatever the case may be at a relatively efficient cost per square foot.
I think I was referring a little bit more to longer term sort of metrics, maybe like a return analysis, what sort of, as we get further away from the investment, are we kind of looking at the impact of those investments to sort of future economy and future job growth in that area?
Well, I would argue that many of the metrics I just mentioned are long-term. So with the creation of housing units, the useful life of a housing unit is 30 years, give or take. So we are measuring, when we think about the goals of CIF and CCC, it's creating new spaces that people can take advantage of and can live in affordably or work in affordably. So how creation of new space at an efficient, with an efficient cost is, I think, fairly long-term. Similarly, grand list creation, cities are going to see the benefits of that grand list addition into perpetuity, or again, for the useful life of the asset. So I think those are ways of making sure that these are not one-time hits, one-year benefits to a community. These are investments that are building assets that are going to pay back to the users of that asset and the community that the asset's located in for, again, 30 plus.
I'd like to kind of get an understanding, year on year, how we see those funds, still at work. It was, done in year 0, but in year 3, that housing project that was built was 100% finished, and it has 90% occupancy rate, and we will it's helped increase affordable housing, or whatever the metric is. I think just more of ongoing sort of reporting is what I was chatting about. So thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you, Representative Dayton. We will hear next from Representative Harrison, to be followed by Representative Dillon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, you've kind of indicated not everything's coming together at the same time, and you got the report and a little bit later, and it seems like this hearing is a little sooner, but and then we hear this other fund is not included. Is there something that you need us to do statutorily to get everything linked together so we hear about everything all at once and it's all inclusive?
I think there's a disconnect in the way the law was crafted. Part of it says that we could look at these reports as part of our regular audit of DECD, the regular, the audits we do, the agency, whereas the other part of the statute links to this hearing. And just the timing of our workload, it just, we would need a little bit more time. And a lot of that has to do, as Brian said, I mean, the facts are not going to change. It just has to go through management review, and the auditing standards are very rigorous as it relates to the, how we document and all of those things. And it flows all the way up to us. Eventually, it's more, we just didn't have the, it's just the timing is not. That report is very complicated. There's a lot there.
Correct.
A lot of numbers, and, like I said, the bottom line, they're doing a better job, but it still takes time to review.
So I definitely appreciate all of that. I know that we appreciate what you do, because you're doing that on behalf of all of us. So it sounds like your answer is yes, that could be helpful.
Yeah, I think we expect to issue the full report in about a month or so, within the month, maybe even sooner. But
so maybe we can have that discussion offline and see if there's something that we, here as a committee can do to make it more advantageous for all of us. Okay.
Yes, no, we'd like to do that, and we do our best. Timing is tight.
As I said, we appreciate it. We don't want your timing tight. We'd rather have the ability to be here and everybody, have everything that they'd like to have. So we'll talk about that offline. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Harrison. Representative Dillon, to be followed by Representative Exum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the Commissioner, Dawn, following up on the comments by the Finance Chair about the film and digital credit, I agree that it would be good to have the performance audit done, but I guess I've been looking at that program since the experience with Blue Sky, and it would seem to me that even if there are difficulties measuring job creation, and I know that's tricky. The closure of a studio after they get a benefit is a whole different situation. And I wonder, does the department include clawback provisions in its agreements with when you extend certain benefits? That is, if certain targets aren't met, or if they leave prior to the expiration of an agreement, do they have to pay us back or their parent company? Through you, Madam Chair.
I'm gonna turn this over to George, who heads up our Office of Film, for the particulars of how the clawbacks might work.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So to respond, aren't necessarily clawback built into legislation, but there is a provision for remedy at law.
Problems.
Representative Dillon, you might need to mute. I think we have a feedback loop. So while the question's being answered, you may need to mute.
I'll try again. Okay. So what I was saying was that there isn't any specific clawback language in the legislation, but there is a provision in the legislation for us to pursue remedy at law for any fraudulent claims that are made and granted against the incentive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, just a follow up. But it may not be fraud. It could be a business decision. And in that case, the parent company actually still has a presence here. So I understand there would be an issue, but it would seem that if it were closed down, that it might not necessarily be provable that it's fraud, but if we had a time frame, do you have that kind of flexibility, sir? Thank you, Madam.
George, can I jump in?
Absolutely.
So I want to make a distinction between this tax credit and some other programs where we've made a huge change away from prospectively funding. So the way that the tax credit works here is you only get a tax credit, you only get a benefit on money that is spent. Unlike you've heard me and you've heard my predecessor talk about some previous programs where we were giving prospective loans, which were in return for future job creation that was yet to be seen, which is something we don't do anymore. The tax credit for the film and tax credit is something where you're not getting money upfront and then we're hoping you're going to do something in the future. You're only getting the credit on the funds that are spent already in the past. So while I agree the closure of a studio is clearly not the goal, it's not as we are not incentivizing, we're not paying for activity at that studio in advance of the activity actually happening. The only thing that we would have paid for is the actual construction of the studio, which did happen clearly without the goals that were intended, but it's not that there was payment for future activity that never materialized.
Thank you, Madam. And I don't know how much we want to go into the fact pattern of that particular case, but that did catch my attention. And I want to make sure that you have the tools that you need so that we can protect taxpayers and that I guess that's all I need to say. If there's something you need from us, we should know. Thank you. And thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Representative Dillon. To be followed by Representative Exum and followed then by Representative Farr.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just have a question for the commissioner regarding the 30,000 new jobs. And I just would like to know if you could expound upon where the jobs are, what those jobs are, and maybe the average salary, please.
Well, I have to follow up with you with that data. Those are great questions, and I should have brought the detail with me, and I didn't, and we will follow up.
Okay, thank you so much. That's all.
And Commissioner, in your follow-up, as I think, protocol is you can send it to our clerk, who will then get it to all of the respective members.
Thank you.
Thank you. And there is a follow-up. No,
I'm sorry. Thank you.
there is not a follow-up. Okay, thank you. We'll go on to Representative Farr.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here. And actually, my question is directed at our wonderful audit team before us. I know you had mentioned that you expect to complete the further analysis of what is the film and digital tax credit. Can you all specify a little bit more on the timing of when you expect to complete that?
That report's being done by our performance audit unit. So I reached out to the auditor that's doing it right now. I think we expect to share our findings and recommendations with the agency in about a month or so. And again, it has to flow up through our management review, which sometimes takes a while because it goes to the direct supervisor and then the deputy state auditor and then to the 2 state auditors for review. And they're reviewing it for making sure we're adhering to all the standards and documentation standards and the like. So that's where we are right now.
So several months, I'm hearing. Is that accurate?
It's tough to say. It depends on how, they're in they have the findings and recommendations together. They have to draft the report, which could be lengthy.
Okay.
And the different levels of review. It depends on how the supervisor, what the supervisor finds, but that's our goal, is to get it out. And I just would note, we've spent kind of figuring out about 15,000 hours at DECD auditing them since 2018. So we've had them under a lot of scrutiny in this, this performance audit's the last piece.
And is what you're producing just looking at the 2022 results of that credit, or is it looking prospectively as well?
It's more looking at the efficiency and effectiveness of the program itself and opportunities for improvements to the program or deficiencies that we find.
And just kind of following up on that, I saw in your testimony, you did note one piece of, I think, inaccuracy or something that had come up in your review of the film and digital tax credit. Is there anything on the findings that you're able to share at this time based on reviewing the 2022 annual report?
So you're referring to the last bullet point in the testimony?
Yes, yeah.
So that's a specific review of the backup they provided us for the calculation of the impact for the film infrastructure tax credit, which includes various companies. The error is related to a specific company as far as there were incorrect ineligible acquisition costs. Now we know the number we note of inputs is $644,897. That isn't necessarily the net effect. They use the an economic modeling system. They'd have to rerun the number. It would be smaller than that. We just don't know what it is, so we didn't want to estimate a number, but it would be less than that. But just as far as reviewing what numbers they were putting in to see if numbers were accurate, that's the error we found as far as that. So there would be some sort of impact, just smaller than that as far as the amount. I believe that one is, I have it in front of me. It's table 13, and that one they estimated a loss of 11.5 million. So it would be a little bit worse. We just don't know the exact.
Okay.
But we have reviewed all the backup for that.
Okay, so it would add to the losses of over
would
11
be a
million
little bit
dollars
less.
that we're seeing as a state. Commissioner, do you, I just want to check in with you on that finding. Is that a finding that your team kind of concurs with?
I believe so. Kara, do you want to weigh in?
Yes, that's correct. We agree with that finding.
Thank you. And then I just had one other follow-up question for the commissioner, and I appreciate the broad kind of brushstrokes you kind of provided us with the report, and similar to other colleagues, I'm sure we'll be coming back to you with further questions. I think at the outset, you kind of spoke to that we've had these credits that we've used as a state, but you've been building out some other ways to spur economic growth. And could you just speak to broadly, what the kind of upsides and downsides of credits are versus some of these other approaches you're taking, and if that's an area where we should be looking at a better investment of our dollars?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think credits are a fairly precise tool because we are, like I mentioned in response to the questions around the film tax credit, we are only issuing credits as a result of activity that we can measure and that DRS can verify. That's where we get our data. It's not perspective. It's not a promise to do something in the future. It is something that has been done already. It's money that has been spent already that DRS can verify. And that's how we size the incentive that we then provide to the company. So there's certainly some real benefit to that. And Governor Lamont has had an important strategy around having our incentives be performance-based and only received once they've been earned by the activity that was intended. So there's real benefits to tax credits in that regard. The areas in which tax credits don't make as much sense is around capital development, capital projects and community development, because frequently those types of projects have a really large initial outlay. You are not spending money year over year on your employees the way a business is. You're instead spending a huge upfront amount on a capital project, on building a warehouse or building a housing project, whatever the case may be. And so that's why you'll see the tool that we're using in that community development section. The tool there is largely grants. And it's important. These are projects that just wouldn't get over the finish line without government support, and they're projects that we believe pay off for the community in important ways, some of which I've mentioned thanks to Representative Cheeseman's question. Some of the metrics that I've mentioned are measurable, and some of them are not measurable. Some of the benefits that we're going to see from these community development projects are things like a word I use all the time and I make fun of myself for, but vibrant downtowns. That's hard to measure and hard to put in the report here. And of course, we want to stay as quantitative as possible, and the grants will all have quantitative return measures. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that it's important to all of us to invest in our downtowns, invest in our communities. And some of that is inevitably going to be impossible to measure with numbers, and is going to be it's a feeling that you get. It's a desire that people feel when they come to a Connecticut city or town, where they think, this is where I want to live. This is the community that's humming and buzzing, and people are walking around and smiling at each other, and there's activity everywhere. So I don't want to overstate the qualitative elements, because certainly we're going to measure everything we can, but I also wanted to just highlight some of those important benefits that we're looking for that are harder to measure.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. It's just helpful to kind of understand the strategic approach here. And I appreciate the time, the report. I'm sure we'll be following up again with further questions. And thank you to the auditors as well for joining us. Thank you to the chair.
Thank you, Representative Barr. I'm trying to see if I'm missing any hands. Yes, Rep. McCarty.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And mine mostly comments, but I did want to first thank DECD for the report. I found it very useful and comprehensive, and really brought us up to date on some of the activities. I know this is just a small area of the report, but I was interested in the international trade and foreign direct investment piece, and wondering if you had the opportunity to maybe tell us if you think there's that's an area that Connecticut can continue to grow, and what ability there might be to create new jobs using that investment. And it looked to me on the step, are those some of the federal dollars that were brought in, and how can we continue that? Because I do believe that's a market area that we have are now starting to focus in on. So if you would like to just comment for a moment on that, and then if I may, Madam Chair, I have a follow-up.
Great, thank you for highlighting that section, because it is a really important initiative for us. And you're right that it's mostly funded through federal funds. So to answer your question on how do we continue to make sure these efforts move forward, in particular, the STEP grants are a key tool here. We just applied, I believe, a week ago for the next allocation of STEP grants. So the plan is to continue to pursue those federal funds, continue to be really smart about which Connecticut businesses take advantage of them, and supporting those Connecticut businesses to make the best use of those dollars, help them figure out which trade shows are the best to go to, which technical resources are less expensive, best bang for their buck. So we do plan to stretch those dollars further. I don't think we can get a materially larger amount of money because it's allocated based on there's a finite amount for the country, and so we try to get as much as we can, but I don't think you're going to see a huge shift from that number for historic number. And just a couple other things that the report highlights, but I want to highlight as well. There are, in addition to funding, there's a lot of activity going on at DECD to encourage international businesses to come here and to help Connecticut businesses to go abroad, to sell abroad, including, for example, right now there's a contingent, or they're on their way back from DC. There's a contingent of advanced CT employees and DECD employees who were at a Select USA conference in DC, where they were pitching Connecticut to foreign companies. That's the express purpose of that conference. That's pretty much the conference for site selectors for international businesses. And we also had representatives for multiple Connecticut municipalities there. And then in June, the governor, myself, and a handful of other DECD folks are going to be going to the Paris Air Show, which is the preeminent aerospace conference, where we will be doing the same thing, helping Connecticut businesses sell abroad and trying to bring international businesses to Connecticut.
I'm jealous. That's all I can say to you on that matter. On the, I meant just jealous. I'm going to the Paris Air Show. I
hear it's more work than play, but I look forward to it.
Yes, thank you. And then on the Office of the Permit Ombudsman, if that sounds very promising, and has that worked to expedite the permitting? And if you'd like to just comment there for a moment.
Yes, I think a lot of credit goes to the legislature for setting up this office in the past, and we've definitely seen companies appreciate the service, concierge service that they get from our team. But in particular, I want to call out or compliment the concierge team at DEEP, who has really made a lot of strides in accelerating permitting, and they're extremely responsive to our ombudsman, our permit ombudsman. And I have personally seen the turnaround time much shorter and the response time much shorter from DEEP. And then I know that a lot of developers that we work with have said the same thing. So I think there's been great strides in that department.
Well, that's good news. Is that office, though, is it limited to certain agencies, or pretty much? I thought I read there were just, you mentioned a few of them, but so it made me think perhaps it doesn't go as broadly as it might.
Yeah, I think we mentioned DEEP and DOT in our report. I think that's really the majority of the permitting activity. I can't think of other agencies that have significant permitting oversight. I'm sure I'm missing something.
I think there was some work going on, I believe, with the Department of Public Health as well. But thank you for that. And then just one final comment, if I may. I was so pleased to see all the good work that was going on with the Office in Connecticut Tourism and all the hits to the website. And looks like that is really resulting in very positive results for our state. So just thank you for being here today, and to the auditors. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative McCarty. Questions from colleagues in person or remote? Yes, Mr. Chair, Representative Meskers.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to refer back to what's obviously received a lot of attention is the film tax credits. In a framework, I want to look at the film tax credits from a couple of different points in commerce, I think. One is the necessary credits, if they're necessary, to anchor the businesses to the state and the economic activity related to them. I want to look at what at the margin is incremental job growth in terms of those industries where we are providing a tax credit to. And the question is whether the tax credits become sticky or sunset and move on to new entrants who are building an industry in my state. At some point, you think about tax credits the way I would have looked at in very basic, although I wasn't around for the Erie Canal. The government subsidies for infrastructure are always necessary to create a network for some industries, whether it was the railroads, whether it was for telephones, interstate commerce, et cetera. The question is, do they become an ongoing activity that requires a constant credit? And if it is it to grow the businesses or just to prevent them fleeing my state for a different revenue regime? Because, you know, it's a scarce resource. And I want to make sure we think about that the same way I've leaned in on you to think about our brownfield remediation, where I know what I get there. I get a piece of property back on the tax rolls. I get a rejuvenated urban center was the victim of our industrial revolution that gets to clean up their act and gets to put things back to work. If people need tax credits to stay in my state, I'm not necessarily opposed, but I'm going to be more questioning of the ongoing subsidy. And we need to measure that. We need to measure whether the number of employees, the salaries, the payroll, it justifies the expansion or the maintenance of those credits. And if we don't have the measurement tools, I hope we build out those measurement tools. Both, I would trust our auditors and our DECD to figure out the measurement tools to make sure that we're doing better for our constituents. And I think that's kind of where the question lies on this. And so we want to watch it closely. And I don't know, Alexandra, I know you've probably been talked to death on it, but if you have any thoughts, do you have the proper tools to measure those credits? And I know you made some allusion to it. Concretely, what kind of measurements are you going to require going forward? If I can.
So I think the key thing we need to be able to evaluate this credit in a apples to apples way with the way that we evaluate other credits is jobs that are a direct result of the credit. So URA tax credits, many of the other tax credits in here, the way we're really confident in a conservative approach to evaluating is we're saying we know exactly the cost to the state for this credit, and we know exactly the revenue that is coming in that's net new that would not otherwise have come in. And that's largely the two sources of that are the personal income tax revenue from new jobs and the sales and use tax revenue from new construction. So we would love to be able to make a very clear, clean analysis of dollars out and dollars in. And right now we don't know that job input number. That's the one that we don't have. And so we're making a bunch of assumptions. And that was the sort of progression of thinking that I went through with Representative Horn. But if we were able to really know with much higher degree of confidence, these jobs, these X number of jobs are here only because of the credit and wouldn't be otherwise, then we could do an analysis that would be much more accurate.
Well, thank you very much. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Martin.
Thank you. Commissioner, I have two questions. Regarding the cannabis angel investment tax credit, was there really a need to provide a tax credit for this type of investment?
I'm not familiar with the motivation behind creating the tax credit. It was not something that DECD championed. In terms of the need, it has been taken advantage of. So clearly there's folks who saw value in it, but that's pretty much the extent of my familiarity with the intent of the program.
Thank you. I guess we'll have to look for ways to make sure that that doesn't happen. The second question I have, out of all the programs that you have, how many are related to, the conversation is always about job creation and retaining. What about training? There's a lot of emphasis throughout the building to create job training programs, tie in those that may want to improve their work skills or go into different maybe fields of work. And I don't see too much within this report regarding the development of work skills. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. You're right that that's a top priority for for the legislature, for the governor, for the economy. All the job training activity falls within the Office of Workforce Strategy. So that's why you're not going to see it in the DECD report.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Senator Martin. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the second time. Commissioner, I know in the ARPA funding, there was money that states received as of right for tourism support, but also some competitive grants. Obviously, my part of the world, tourism is very important. Did DECD, get it together here, girl, apply for and were we was successful in receiving any of those competitive grants for tourism?
We absolutely received and are diligently spending our $8 million, roughly $8 million of formula EDA funding. I am not familiar with competitive opportunities. It does not mean that they don't exist. Our tourism director is out on leave at this moment, and so I don't have her on the line to answer the question. But I will follow. I'd love to give you an update on how we're spending the $8 million that I know we got, which we are putting to very good use, including updating Connecticut's welcome centers. And then I want to know for myself whether we applied to any of these competitive ones, and if not, why not? And we'll follow up.
EDA had 250 million available in competitive grants, and I'd just be curious as to, you know, if we took the advantage of applying, and if so, did we get any of the money and where did it go?
Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Cheeseman. Representative Huska.
Thank you, Senator Hartley and Madam Chair and Mr. Chair. A question for the Commissioner in regards to the SIF fund. Are there any projections out of your office as far as when the SIF fund will dry up? And are there any plans to at some point replenish it, and to what extent, if that's the case? I know that it's being used by a lot of different interests and many different layers and levels of government. I know that my district and my city has benefited from it, and we thank you and your office very much for that. But just just wanted to see if there's any kind of projections from your office as to when that fund is going to be depleted for you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the question. The fund is currently funded for 5 years at $175 million per year. So we know for sure the timeline, and it'll be 2 rounds per year. So 10 total rounds. There is in the legislation an outline of what a renewal might look like. It envisions an increase in the annual amount, but it's not automatic. That would need to be acted on legislatively in order for it to be renewed for a second 5 years.
Thank you very much for that. And so we're in year 2 of the fund, correct?
We've done 2 out of the 10 rounds, or 1 out of the 5 years.
Okay, thank you very much. Back to you, Madam Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. I'm looking to see if I'm missing any other hands. Well, not done yet, though. So, Madam Commissioner, I know maybe lunch is waiting, maybe not, but
okay, I'm here. I'm with you.
So we talked about migration in, but what's the net number versus migration in, migration out? Because that's the real litmus test in terms of how we're holding it up in terms of population in the state.
Yeah, I apologize if I was not clear in my opening remarks. Those numbers were net numbers. So we are net up 30,000.
Oh, okay, net. And what is the department doing to adjust to the new 21st century live model with remote working, how the downstream is playing out in all of our urban centers? We drive by them all the time and we see restaurants shuttered, we see businesses shuttered because pedestrian traffic has been very much diminished. And it's a real pain point, I think, in every state, in every municipality, small or large, but I think we've really got to get in front of this. I'd like to know what the plan is and what we can expect to see.
So I appreciate the question. It's a issue that's near and dear to my heart. We are really focused on concentrating investments in downtown areas so as to get the best bang for our buck. So think about if we were to take $100 million grant program and make $101 million investments all over the state, those investments are not building on one another because no one's seeing, it's not like you're driving by 3 in a row. They're all over the state. You're not going to see them within one short period of time. So the focus on for all of our grant programs has been to focus on concentrating and having density and dense investments where they're capitalizing on one another. And what I mean by that is I don't want this to be misinterpreted as that only can be in a big city and isn't going to be in a small town. That's certainly not the case. It was just referenced a minute ago that CIF has given awards to smaller towns and cities for sure. But the goal is to make sure that we're, like I said, layering investments on top of one another, putting them all in these dense downtown areas, wherever a city has their main street, wherever you already have investment and already have activity, that's where we want to be adding in additional activity. We don't want to be a greenfield off the highway in the middle of nowhere, building up some new housing. We want to be doing it downtown where there's already retail, where there's already infrastructure, transit, where there are already utilities, so that the benefits can be kind of 2 + 2 = 5 instead of 2 + 2 = 4 or worse.
Thank you very much for that answer. And, I completely agree with the aggregation and also the importance of that as a priority. And having said that, we did have a lot of discussion today about the CIF, and some of that was about metrics. And it seems that as we've gone through the first year of the program, we are beginning to refine the metrics or the program requirements. My understanding anyway is, and that is that we're talking about having to have an end user or a shovel in the ground. And I just want to ask you about that because as that plays out, there are some times when that is counterintuitive. The example being urban areas where we are trying to regentrify, put them back on the tax rolls. We are not going to get any kind of an end user until it is a platform and ready for that phase of development. And so therein, if we are looking only at projects that have end users, we are going to stand in place primarily in our urban centers. Would you comment?
Yeah, there is definitely a tension between focusing too much on shovel-ready projects and saying something has to be at the finish line to qualify for funds. There's a tension between that approach and the approach of laying the groundwork at really challenging sites that no private developer has shown up to because they are so challenging, and they probably need government help in order to even get to a place where the private sector would be interested. So I certainly see the merits of both of those approaches. All else being equal, it is certainly better bang for the buck on taxpayer money to have high priority, great sites that do have a private sector developer at the table that's ready to go. So we are always looking for that site that is in a great location in an urban core that has private sector interest already, and many of the other, of course, there's a long list of attributes that make a good project. But sympathetic and
recording in progress.
Sympathetic to the situation that you just described. And we have funded, certainly we've funded brownfields and funded properties that don't have a private developer at the table that are really early stage because they are just so important and so and at such a large scale that they make a huge difference to whatever that particular municipality is. So the examples that come to mind are a large CIF investment in Waterbury brownfield, I think a $10 million brownfield in Waterbury in round one, and similarly a upwards of $10 million investment in Middletown on a brownfield there to do site prep in advance of having a developer. In both of those cases, those were in advance of having a developer at the table. So we do it both ways, and there's merits to both approaches.
Correct. And I followed that very carefully. And that was in the first round. My concern was that I was hearing that the program is then refocusing on to only those applications that have end users. And that's the reason for my comments and of course, concern. I'll mention one other thing. And I think in terms of metrics, when we're looking at making these investments and we really want to move the needle, and we have to recognize that some communities are in a better position to attract new development than others, and that's where we really need to have the jump start. But the unemployment numbers are, in my mind, pivotal in trying to make these assessments. You know, the state of Connecticut is averaging about 4.3. You report here in the annual report as compared to the US, which is a 3.6. Well, I'll tell you, in my community, unemployment is 6% right now. And so that's telling you something. And so without some real infusion, that's going to stay stagnant or even go south.
So we do factor in unemployment by municipality, and the way that gets factored in is in the distressed municipality list. So certain programs prioritize, all of our programs prioritize distressed municipalities in some way or another. And unemployment, high unemployment, certainly higher than the state average, would make a municipality more likely to be on the distressed municipality list. So it's factored into the way that we're prioritizing projects in that way.
I just had to get that on the record, Commissioner Dom, because I think it's so very important. And the truth is, when we've been talking about, you know, over the years, First Five and, you know, all of the other programs, it has been a frequent refrain of mine that is a very telling metric, and it needs to be primary in terms of the consideration of those grants. Can you just, so, you know, the annual report gives us a lot of information, some of which, and by the way, we did that simplification that was pre you being in this seat to try to streamline it on your end so that, you know, it's manageable and it's a useful report. But as I'm going through this report, I will tell you, I'm seeing parts of it that I think maybe we took too much of a haircut on. I'll tell you, one of them is there's no metrics or any description here of the governor's closing fund. You want to talk to us about that?
I asked my team the same question, so I'm with you. The governor's closing fund is not something that has had any awards or activity in recent memory, which is why it's not, you don't have a list here of projects that have received the governor's closing fund. I think we just wanted to leave this in here prospectively and acknowledge that we have some flexibility to help get a project over the line through a tool that isn't specifically listed somewhere else in the annual report. If there is a situation that arises like that, we have a small amount of money that we could use to help get something over the line. That's what the governor's closing fund refers to. I had not heard of it until I even read the annual report the first time a couple of months ago. So it's not something we use actively, nor do we plan to use it. We just want to mention that it is something that's available.
So how much money is in it?
I think it pulls on it's so we would use MAA funds for this. It's not a separate bucket or a separate line item. We would use MAA funds for an opportunity like this.
And then would you FAC that to move it from MAA?
Well, we would only be able to use MAA if it fit the requirements of MAA, which are listed elsewhere in the report, and maybe one of my team members can come up with the page reference. But we would not need to. Sorry, it's right before on page 25. If the investment fit the criteria of MAA, then we'd be able to use MAA for that.
Okay, so it would be MAA funded and not closing fund.
I think, yeah, closing fund is more of a branding name, not technically related to the source of funds.
Okay, and then Commissioner, we did a transition here to from the SBX model to the Earn As You Go Boost Fund. And I guess if you can just, I mean, so here's one where you just click on it to see the results of the 23 information on there. Can you give us a thumbnail here on how Boost is doing? And then as a follow-up, I would like to know what money is left in SBX, because it was evergreen in certain sense. Yeah, okay, I'll leave it at that.
So on Boost, you're right that we're transitioning from Express to Boost, and we anticipate giving out $150 million over 5 years. That is roughly split 50-50 between state money and private sector money. So far, the program was launched in July of last year, and we've given out 213 loans and $27 million. That's as of the last report, as of April 1st. So we're doing quite well on deploying the funds. And I have more details on kind of breakdown by county, breakdown by race. I can read some of those out, or I can provide that report, whatever is helpful, Madam Chair.
Okay, so who are our community partners in this? And so, I mean, the model was that we could cover more grounds by having private sector partner with this. Us on this.
That's exactly right. So we've covered more ground in the fact that we've raised about a 50-50 match, a little bit better than that actually, from outside private funds that are going to match the state funds to go into these loans into small businesses. And so that partner is called NDC. They raised the money from a handful of banks. That's the 75 that's come in to match ours. And then we partner with community lenders, such as Sector in Southeastern Connecticut, such as Headco in the Hartford area. And those community lenders help us those are the lenders that get ultimately matched with the borrowers, and they provide the loan, they service the loan. They're not providing the capital. As I mentioned, those come from the bigger banks that was raised through NDC, but the community lenders are the ones that are partnering on the ground with the borrower to qualify them, to give them the loan, to service the loan, and to work with them through the life of the loan.
Help me out. Who's NDC?
Paul, National Development Corporation. Did I get that right? I apologize.
Yeah, you did. Correct.
It's a partner. It's not a Connecticut-based company. That has been a concern of other folks in the past. We ran a very competitive process to figure out who would be our partner on this program, and they offered us the best match of outside funds to our funds. And as you mentioned, that the whole point is to make those funds go as far as they can on behalf of Connecticut businesses. So we selected them for that match, and also for the fact that they've run similar programs all over the country and had all the technology and all the know-how to get it stood up really quickly. And they did get it stood up impressively quickly.
And so our community lenders, who are they?
There are 5 or 6 of them. I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Robertson, who can hopefully rattle them off.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple, which is there's Headco, SAMA, we've got Minority Construction Council, we've got Girls for Technology sector, and we can get a full list over to you in terms of how we're distributing that.
Yeah, we need that. And then let me ask you how that works. So someone, one of the community lenders that has been vetted or chosen, then can choose whether or not and how much they're going to be lending through this program?
That's exactly right. So the way they set their own parameters of how much they're willing to lend, what type of credit profile they're willing to lend to, how many loans they want to do. And so borrowers are going into the application system. They are putting in all their information and getting matched with a community lender that matches their profile. That, for example, some of the community lenders have a credit score, minimum credit score higher than others. So it's those types of factors that will result in a match. And then from there on, the community partner contacts or works directly, once they've been matched, works directly with the borrower to check all of their information and do all the other qualifications and ultimately disperse the funds.
Yes, and Representative Meskers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going forward with the community lenders, given the fact that some are under federal and state programs, I don't know whether this is the purview exclusively of commerce versus banking, but I want to understand what the mandates are and what the development prospects are and who they target to lend. Because the extent that you're using your funds or our funds or my constituents' funds, I want to make sure that people are meeting the metrics and the targets so that they are doing, if you will, God's work, that we're lending to people who don't have access to the public markets, or we're lending to people at advantageous rates to spur economic development, and that they're doing the job we've mandated or we're supporting them to do. So I've been in a couple of conversations. I'm not sure I'm comfortable, and I'm not sure where we go with this. And it'll probably be a conversation for the auditors as well, just to make sure that that every dollar that's lent out is having the economic impact that we want it to have. I want to walk around this state in 5 years and see those vibrant hamlets and cities, and make sure that we're getting part of what you're suggesting. And I want to hold those institutions more accountable, I think. So I'll be looking forward to working with you on that.
Yeah, just a couple quick comments. I think we're really well aligned on the goals of this program, and we have had some success. We'll send you the full report, but 63% of the borrowers are of diverse ownership, and we have a further breakdown of the different ways of measuring that. And we also track the borrowers by credit score, which I think is one of the best ways to judge whether we're doing a good job reaching folks that wouldn't otherwise be able to access capital, because credit score is usually one of the biggest barriers. I think we have room for improvement on the credit score front. We are 40% of the borrowers have a lower than 700 credit score, but I'd like to see us be able to successfully work with folks that have those lower credit scores. Again, this is taxpayer money. We need to be very responsible and careful and make sure that we're going to get it back. But with best practices with these community lenders and with the technical assistance that we provide, I think there is a path to be lending to folks with lower credit scores or no credit scores as a result of just cultural differences that haven't been taken on credit in the past, and be able to provide them with loans that we will see coming back to the taxpayers eventually.
No, I'm just to follow up. There's no inference or reference to DECD. I have a phenomenal time working with you guys. I love the responses I get, the attentiveness. I worry when the train leaves the station, when the dollar exits the ATM, and that's more my process. So that's where we'll have that conversation. It's not, I'm not worried that the intent isn't there. I just want to make sure the follow through from some of those third parties is where we want it to be. Okay.
And the buck stops with us. So we're responsible for our third parties. So I appreciate that, and we'll work with you on that.
Perfect. Thank you much.
And Commissioner, if you could just give us a thumbnail on the recovery bridge loan, that was very important during COVID pandemic. And, you know, did we exhaust all of our ARPA CARES dollars on that? I'm interested in what the default rate was. And was that really the lifeline we hoped it would be?
The recovery bridge loan is, just to give some of the stats specifically, we gave out, this is on page 29, we gave out 2,122 recovery bridge loans totaling $41.8 million. And as of January of 23, it was those funds were 78% repaid. We have not written off any of these loans yet. Kara, that's correct, right? Okay. So we've not written off any loans, so we don't have a default rate to date because we're still, many of them are just coming due, or we have extended a couple. We have had a policy of extending for a couple of months to just help people continue to bridge. But we will probably at the end of this year begin to have, at the end of this year, we'll have a sense of what the likely default rate is, and we will have started to default people. But right now we only know what we've had paid back, and 78% repaid. We're feeling like it's headed in the right direction.
Thank you, Commissioner. And so there were certain sectors that were really slammed, not that everybody wasn't. And I'm just wondering if you have any kind of a read on them, and particularly the restaurant industry. I was told that we lost some 600 restaurants. I'm not sure, you know, if we were able to, how many were, you know, lit back up. But I'm particularly interested in that and some of the proposals that we have before us this legislative session.
I can speak to, we had a program that was specific to the hospitality industry. I don't know if that's what if you want to talk in the rearview mirror of what we did to support, or if you're looking for kind of a state of the industry today.
I'm sorry, I did miss that. My apologies.
No problem. So I just want to make sure I understand the question. Are you interested in understanding programs that we had in the past to support particularly hard hit industries? Or are you looking for kind of a forward-looking perspective on those industries going forward?
I'm interested in the hospitality and particularly the restaurant industry, because as I said, I'm understanding we lost 600 small businesses, restaurants. Don't know how many of them were able to come back online, and if we've got, you know, any perspective from the department in terms of how that sector is doing.
So I apologize, I don't have a numeric perspective, but I would certainly say that it continues to be one of the harder hit industries. It was not an easy industry to survive in before the pandemic. We all know that sort of it's almost a expression, right? You open a restaurant and it's going to be hard, and you're not going to make a lot of money. So we work very closely with the Restaurant Association to do everything we can, especially during COVID, to help that industry, and did have a hospitality grant program that was not just for restaurants, but was for a handful of hospitality industries, where we gave automatic grants out to businesses in those industries. They were not loans, they were grants, and they didn't require a big complicated application, because we knew that folks were struggling to run their businesses and didn't have time to be doing a lot of paperwork. So we did work extremely closely with the industry during COVID on both financial support and trying to make the state as friendly as possible within the bounds of safety to run a restaurant during the pandemic. And going forward, we continue to, I don't see we don't currently have any financial programs that are specifically targeted at that industry, but we certainly will continue to work with the individual restaurants and the restaurant associations to help them to continue to help.
Yes, Representative Meskers.
Thank you for those words. I think I spent 8 or 9 years waiting tables, and I had a brother who was in the distribution business in a company in the order of Cisco. So big industrial side. it's a phenomenon across the country as I speak to people in the industry that there's been a huge consolidation. There's a huge pickup in chains. So I think when you think about the United States, we recently were talking about liquor sales in supermarkets, and we were inundated with package stores, which represented an entrepreneurial spirit, which I thought was wonderful. And I think the restaurant business is that entry level as well. So it's a big place for our immigrant community to open up, that people, literally who are willing to spend 18 hours a day or 16 hours a day in the efforts to build their way to the American dream. So everything we can do to facilitate that, whether like the package stores, whether it be those icons of retail industry that are going to sit in our cities, in our vibrant cities. We're going to have, I don't know how many doggy salons and nail places and liquor stores and restaurants. And so much of the industry is becoming an Amazon industry, which is very tough for our retailers. So I think it's important that we focus on those cores. When we talk about vibrant cities, there's a reason you need to go to that downtown area, whether it be had sat down for 12 hours on culture, history, museums, tourism. The parts that make the cities vibrant is why you're going to go there today. And it's not to get a lot of unfortunately, not to get as much of your clothing or your shoes, which end up online, but we want to bolster that industry. So I think when we talk about vibrant communities, I want to echo my co-chair's comments that, the restaurant industry, we need to stand up for it if possible. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Meskers. Representative Mushinsky, just coming in from the great outdoors, I'm assuming. You've got the floor, madam.
Thanks, ma'am. I have been listening while I'm working here. But follow-up question on vibrant cities. I wanted to ask the commissioner if she works on a regular basis with the Department of Transportation Commissioner and the Department of Housing Commissioner. Because just to give one recent example, I went up to Hartford with a bunch of my constituents on the train to attend a really joyous UConn celebration when our team became champions again. And for that one day, people who got off the train and they ate at the restaurants. There aren't very many downtown anymore. And but they did. They went to the restaurants and then they got back on the train later and went home. It is downtown needs work. It has life when there's an event there, and then it doesn't. Are we working to add housing units around the community college and around UConn and Hartford and around the theater and so forth, so that we have a permanent group of people that lives in the downtown that will keep it healthy? So that's my first question.
So I definitely agree with the importance of clustering housing near activity centers. So we mentioned before, just making sure that we're investing dollars in areas where there's already existing density. And so near a community college, near any educational institution would be an example of somewhere where there's already infrastructure, already activity. And we'd definitely be supportive of any applications that come into our grant programs. Of course, assuming they have all the other important attributes we're looking for of an application, but that type of location would definitely be attractive.
But are you working with the other two commissioners?
Sorry, yeah, and to answer that question, yes. Working very closely with those two commissioners and with a slew, basically all the commissioners that intersect with DECD's work. And that's one of the great things about this job, is just the high caliber of really talented individuals that are running other agencies that we can rely on to help us further our goals and vice versa.
Good, that's good. And Department of Higher Ed, I should have added them to the list too, because they're a partner for you. Okay, next question is, some of the brownfield sites we work on got to be brownfield sites because a company made money for a while and then they shut down and left. And the taxpayer ends up picking up the tab for the mess that's still there. Are we, when the company that DECD helps has a potentially has a residue or potentially toxic byproduct or or their site might be contaminated in the future, do we require upfront bond money from them so that the cleanup is already anticipated and prevented and it doesn't become a taxpayer burden afterwards?
You're saying if we're currently giving an award to a company that has the potential to pollute, are we taking money
for
from them?
example, if we bring in a metal finisher and they may contaminate the site, we're bringing them into, say, Waterbury or my town, Wallingford. Do we have them put up a bond to take care of cleaning up their site eventually?
So we do not, and we rely on DEEP's regulatory capabilities and powers to make sure that those folks aren't polluting, and if they are, to follow up with on the damages, to pay for the damages of that pollution. Sorry.
Okay, so that would come under DEEP rather than DC.
Definitely come under DEEP. The brownfields remediation is a DECD program. We partner very closely with DEEP on that, and that's really just former pollution. When it comes to any type of ongoing pollution, that would be obviously highly regulated by DEEP.
Okay, and then my final question, back to the film credit again. When we had the public hearing in finance, we were relying on your report that the film credit as currently written loses money for the state. And the film industry was arguing back at the public hearing saying, no, you forgot to count the money we spend on food and restaurants and other small businesses in the community. And so it's not a valid study because you didn't count all these things. What's your response to that? Do you think you're covering all of the potential expenditures in the community to get a true?
Oops, you Representative, you just went on mute.
Accidentally hit it. Sorry about that, Commissioner. No, the film credit question is, we got some pushback at the public hearing. The film industry said that the DECD study was not accurate because it didn't include food and restaurant expenditures and other local expenditures from small businesses. What do you have to say about that critique? And do you feel you do cover all the local expenditures?
So I assume they were referring to the 2019 evaluation that we did.
Yes.
So that evaluation, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think that the reason that we are continuing to update our methodology is that I worry that 2019 evaluation didn't properly take into consideration all the jobs that were created by the industry, because we were using only the spending mechanism, spending as the only input to the analysis. The particular question you have around, are we counting all the indirect and induced benefits? That analysis did use a software called REMI that does assess indirect and induced. It is not only looking at the direct, it is looking at those other follow-on effects. So that particular concern about the 2019 methodology, I don't agree with, but I do agree that the 2019 methodology needed to be revised for the other reasons that I've stated.
Okay, so when they said you didn't count all the pizzas they bought in Danbury and so on, that's not valid, right?
So let me just make sure I'm looking at the
food purchasing in the restaurants.
Yep. So if you look at our 2019 report, it is, pulling it up, table 12 of our 2019 report. It says it's labeled as estimated economic impact of the film and digital media production tax credit. If that had only been taking into consideration just the direct impacts, it would have said estimated direct economic impact. I know we're getting really into the weeds here, but we do have different approaches to different tax credits based on the information available. And table 12 of the 2019 annual report did take into consideration induced and indirect effects.
Okay, well, that's good to know, because I rely on you. So I was relying on you at the public hearing, and it's good to know. Thank you very much for answering the question.
Thank you, Representative Mashinsky. Representative Wilson.
Thank you. I just have one question kind of for the Commissioner, kind of going back to the CIF. And I, wanted to connect it to some of the other, so those that have gotten it, have you seen that some of the projects that have been awarded have utilized some of the other programs to get to the place that they are within their project, such as remediation money for other things? So do you see a correlation with some of the applications coming in that may have in previous years applied or been awarded some of the other grants and program monies from other opportunities to fully complete some of the projects through CIF now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is yes. We've had a lot of applicants that have taken advantage of other state funding programs, other DECD programs in particular. And that is possibly one way to get a project further along so that they're ready to, in those early stages, you use some smaller programs in order to be ready to apply for a bigger program. Certainly a valid approach, and I expect to see it again in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wilson. Representative Exum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, I just have another question regarding, I haven't read through all of this, and this is all new to me, the annual report, but looking at a bit about the state historic preservation piece, if you could just, talk about that a little bit. And I was curious, under the historic rehabilitation tax credit, if those were just different kinds of buildings or what types of sites versus the homes. I would just like to know more about this program. I did try to go on the website. I don't find it really user friendly, the link there to see the projects. But if you could please just expand about on this a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Liz, do you want to take this one, or you want to watch me do it?
Sure. Well, it would be fun to watch you, but I'm happy to take it for the moment. So there's two kinds of historic preservation tax credits, as you pointed out, Rep. Exum. There is a historic homeowners tax credit. That's a very small tax credit and is available to people who own properties that are either on the state or national register as their own property, because it's just one important structure, or they're in a historic district, state or federal. And they can use it's up to a $15,000. That's the max of the tax credit. And they're designed essentially for small programs, small expenses. So often it's updating plumbing. Sometimes we refer to it as like the bathroom, kitchen, those places in your historic home that really would need upgrades. So that's the historic homes tax credit. It's a much smaller program. The other tax credit program is a state tax credit program that is mostly offered to developers and also to municipalities who want to actually take buildings that are not, generally speaking, take buildings that are not being used and to put them back into use. And so that program is modeled based on the federal tax credit. There is a federal preservation tax credit program, which we also administer in conjunction with the Department of Interior, the National Park Service. And so the state program is based on the federal program, and often they are used hand in hand by a developer, a municipality, to actually sort of maximize the funding deck so they can get to a point where a project is a viable project.
And do you find that it's, especially with the homes, is it a well-utilized program? Do people, how many people apply typically and that you accept?
So I have to get you the specific information, and I'm happy to do that. We consider it to be a well-used program. It changed about, I want to say it was maybe 2 to 3 years ago, where the actual threshold was a $25,000 use. So like if you had a project that was $25,000 or more, you could apply for tax credits. And what we were finding is that the applicants, we were really trying to do an equity check on this program. And what we were finding is that those people who could afford to do a $25,000 project were not necessarily representative of the full spectrum of the people that we wanted to assist by this program. So what happened was the threshold was lowered from $25,000 to $15,000. And what we've started to do is to work with much more deeply with places like the Council of Governments and community organizations, and to let them know that this program exists, so we can do a better job of actually sharing the information. And your question comes at a great time because yesterday I was over at the Connecticut Data Conference, speaking to lots of people who are looking at things like affordable housing, for people who are economically disadvantaged, and all of the things. And one of our strategies moving forward is going to be working very much more closely in partnership with those organizations who are already in there, trying to ensure that people who are vulnerable can achieve housing, but also that people who are striving for home ownership can have a path that would actually help them to take a historic property and improve that property.
That sounds great. It makes me wonder though about individuals or homes that may be old, but may not quite meet the threshold, and trying to have that intersectionality with the community that you're trying to reach that you just described.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. One of the things, if a building is deemed to be eligible to be listed on the state or national register, then that property is also eligible. It's really interesting, and we just released a database actually that everyone can use. It's called CONCRIS, CONNCRIS. And the database now allows anyone in the state of Connecticut to actually go and look at layered uses of state and federal historic districts and properties. And then you can layer there's different layers of information you can put over that. And it's an interesting thing to actually look. It was a little surprising to me finally seeing this picture. It's more than you would think, because we think of historic districts in places like Lebanon, Connecticut, right around the beautiful green. But there's plenty of federally and state designated historic districts around Hartford and New Haven as well. So there is definitely room for more work on that. And I think that would be something our office would definitely be interested in speaking about.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that information. And
Sure.
thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner.
Representative Meskers.
Thank you. So I wanted to direct this towards DECD, but I'll direct it towards SHPO first to start with. Have you hosted any workshops yet on any of the grant writing or opportunities that exist for historic preservation? And would that be a rational request? I hope it's rational, and a request so we could do a couple of those through a Facebook live stream, or get a video done on the process and the application process. And I'm thinking not so much at some level for the state, but assuming that you've worked hand in fist or hand in glove with the feds, it'd be good to be able to get our nonprofits up to speed on some of that. So I'm not sure if you've done any workshops on that, and if we could ask or kindly ask for some help on that.
So that's a great question. The answer is yes. We primarily we were doing them regularly before the pandemic. Moving into the pandemic, we actually did not do a lot of those just because of capacity. However, we have started to work with Connecticut Main Street to talk about what we can do to co-host. You know, sometimes people see emails coming from us about programs that we run. They're not our friends already. They don't necessarily know what we do. And we all know that you don't necessarily open emails from people who aren't your friends because you don't know what they do. So it's really important to be working in partnership. I'm 100% supportive of that. And we actually had a meeting last week to talk about how we're going to be moving forward with working with our partners, Preservation Connecticut. They would often co-host. They're our private partner, but they would often co-host workshops like that. And they do a regular lunchtime lecture drop-in program. So yes, and however you want to see them, however you think they would be most effective, we would be delighted to work in partnership with you on that.
I'm going to tell you the same thing I told Commissioner Barton at DRS. There are 187 elected representatives and senators. I have to defer, of course. And we spend every 2 years trying to get reelected. So we both do Facebook. God, some of us do Instagram. We do emails. We have a communication to our communities that's pretty deep. So I think figuring out the forum and offering it through the House and through the Senate that you'll be doing workshops, we will make sure through our aides to get to the people who pick up our information to host some of those websites. And I think that it's a problem I find throughout the state. I talked to DOT, I talked to everybody else, and they said, "Oh, I've notified your community." I'm like, when was the last time anyone picked up and opened an email from the DOT? So if you're looking to communicate, you really, we do, if someone bangs us on the head and shows it to us, I will go to the Historical Society in Greenwich. I'll go to the Bruce Museum. I'll go to various places. I'll go to the Housing Development Authority. It's all the places that I think would, and it doesn't necessarily be individually for me. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is we will know who to reach out within our community with our legislative aides. We can bang that drum and make that happen. So to the extent you're standing up things, it'd be very well recommended that you do that way. So,
Thank you.
we're willing to
Thank
work
you.
on that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And if we might, Liz, while we have you, I just was curious if you might identify for us on the tourism spectrum, what is the biggest event that we have in the state that draws in people from out of state?
Okay. I am not sure of the answer to that because I'm not directly responsible for tourism. So I'm going to have to, I was trying to think, is there something that I'm missing? I'm going to have to get back to you on that, but I'm happy to share that information.
Yep, I think we'll get you the official numbers. I mentioned our tourism director couldn't be here today, but Sound on Sound was certainly a big draw last year, a new music festival in Bridgeport, and we'll get you the full list of the top events.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now we've got from the budget standpoint, by the way, because I'm looking at this as a little tension there on conservation and development. A request in from the travelers about upfronting the line item that we provide for them, because that is, I think, a probably big draw into the state. I'm not sure where it lines up in terms of bringing in out of state folks amongst others, but so is there a reason why we are behind on the financial payment cycle so extensively there? Because they're asking to be the line item normally and then an upfront on it as well. So that's a double in our budget.
It's just a different approach. So previously it was funding prospectively. They're looking to fund it contemporaneously, basically in the same year. And so the request to have those two different fundings be approved with this budget is a one-time thing to basically just bump us up so that instead of always looking back, we're going to be looking forward, or like I said, funding in the same year that the tournament happens. And it wouldn't have to happen again in the future. It just gets us back. It gets us onto a new schedule that we think is smarter, makes it easier for them to plan, makes it easier for them to know that our money is definitely coming instead of possibly coming at the end of session. So I think it's a one-time pain point.
No, I get that. Except we're still behind from last year, are we not?
Still behind in terms of we have the funding for the tournament that occurred in calendar 2022. I do not believe they are requesting funds. We are not requesting funds for calendar 22. Is that correct?
I'm understanding that that allotment still has not been released.
You're saying has travelers gotten the cash from DECD?
Right.
That you're right. There have been ongoing discussions to just get that contract in place, which I know sounds odd since the event already happened, but the contract has to be put in place and it's been a long process. Is definitely we haven't, I'm not saying we've been doing, it's not our best contracting example in the world. So we're behind on that front, but it's not a matter of getting the funds. It's a matter of just working out the details of the contract.
And is that because it has to go through the AG's office? Why would we be just about 12 months behind on making that the payment?
Yeah, I don't know the ins and outs of every last back and forth with the company. It's not as if we started 12 months ago and it's taken 12 months. It has been slow, but it has not taken 12 months, and we're at the finish line. I think that we've been in great communication with Travelers. I think they are very understanding of the process and know that we're almost at the finish line. I have not gotten any complaints or concerns to the contrary, and I can't answer specifically about the AG's office or what the specific contracting issues have been.
Okay, just a footnote, I would think that, you've got to do a little bit better than 12 months in arrears on, making a payment like that. And in large part, I think that is part of the request why they're asking to bump it up a year prospectively. Are there other questions, not to monopolize this? One very important one, Commissioner, if I can, and that is the Minority Business Revolving Loan Fund. That is a very important fund. And in particular, it's been a target area for the General Assembly, State of Connecticut, the Department of DECD, targeting small businesses, primarily women, minority owned. And it looks like out of 25 million, we have drawn 6 or almost 7. Can you give us some update on that?
I might turn this over to George if you're hanging on out there. Can't see that. George, do you have a sense of when the Minority Business Loan Fund started? Because yes, we're 6.6 out of 25, but I think that is because it's relatively, the start date was relatively recent. But George, can you confirm?
Yeah, I would have to get back with some specificity, but it has been, I think, around since 2015 or so, since the beginning of the.
Okay. Well, we'll have to get back to you, Madam Chair. I apologize as to the start date of that fund and the progress. We have the numerical progress in the report, but if you want some more color commentary about how that's been going, we can get that back to you.
Yeah, so what we see, is this paragraph which talks about 120 contracts executed. But the total assistance that we put into that fund was 25 million. And so, was it anticipated that we would draw that down? Is there going to be a recapitalization of that? And if that's the case, are we well behind? That's about a fifth.
Yeah.
What the fund is, 20%.
Those are good questions. I would have had the same questions if I had realized that the fund was as old as George just mentioned. I thought it had been put in place relatively recently, which would explain the 6.6 drawdown out of 25. So we'll just, I don't know more about this, and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, and so we'll be interested to see how it's scaled and what the history has been, in terms of, our investment and our target area here. Yeah, that's important. You're going to get that back to the entire. Yeah. Yes, Representative Meskers.
Yeah. So following up, if it looks like it's supposed to be 25 million per year. From reading this, it looks like only 6.7 was administered. That's probably the first question. The second question is, I realized because we were looking at this for historical toolkit, I was looking for a revolving loan fund, which we didn't stand up. So the question is going to be what kind of loss ratio that we be targeting going forward, which I'm not opposed to. These revolving loan funds are trying to get to people who don't have access to the natural credit market. So presumably the revolving loan fund in its operations will have 25 million credit extended, will lose some money and will need marginal replenishments if it's fully deployed. And the repayments and additional capital will allow them to continue to make new loans. So yeah, I'm trying to figure out how they envision, where it is. I know you're catching you off guard on that.
Yeah.
Where it is today, what they're envisioning going forward. What's the target of how much to get out the door each year? What's the target of what they want to get back in every couple of years in repayments, and whether they think they're going to need capital infusions on a regular basis, and to what amount. And that they're obviously targeting people who don't have access to the local credit union.
Yeah, I want to dig in here and understand also how this relates to Boost, which we've covered quite well in this hearing, but want to make sure that I understand the interplay between the two and just understand the fact that it looks like it's been going out more slowly than we would expect. So we'll get back to those both chairs. Those are both good questions.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Are there further questions from colleagues? Commissioner, you have been so gracious, as your team has been, because we have really timed out here. And so if I see no further questions, if seeing none, I'm going to thank the commissioner and her team, as well as our auditor and his team, who has been so gracious also to be here with us. Thank you very much. And we do have a few follow-ups, which we will anticipate. And we will talk more, John, about kind of coordinating that time frame. We've already kind of sent out those queries to get it going. So thank you. Please, we will go to the public now, who has been so very patient. And I saw you walk out of the room. I got a little bit worried and started to talk a little longer so that you would have an opportunity to be in the room. And if you would like to come forward, the mic will be all yours, madam. You hit the button.
I was just going out to get a phone charger, so thank you for that.
If you want to start by introducing yourself, that will be helpful to all of us. Thank you, madam.
My name is Evelise Correa, and I'm Executive Director of Good Trouble Advocates and Vice President of BLM 860. And today I will be speaking on the budget. I know I was listening, and there was a little bit of back and forth. I know that I had previously written my testimony, but this kind of answered some questions for me. Now, as we talk about, bonding, financing, apartment stock, we're not talking about affordability. The average apartment right now is $1,500. And unfortunately, our median income in the state of Connecticut is under the minimum qualifications for this. So as we're talking about housing affordability, stock, and building apartments, we're not talking about the record amount of children that are becoming homeless right now, the record evictions that are occurring. So right now we're going to sunset free school meals at a time when childhood homelessness is at record highs in the state of Connecticut. Schools are having trouble keeping up and implementing the McKinney-Vento Act, which most schools, while they deal with a small amount of homelessness, this is unprecedented and it's never been seen before. So there's many children right now falling through the cracks. Teachers don't know if the child is homeless. There's a stigma around it. So the tax credits for families are definitely something that we should keep in the budget. At certain times, they can be lifesavers. I've seen people use them for car repairs just to get back and forth from work, deposits to get out of shelters. So what the state of Connecticut did with this refundable tax credit back to families is life-changing, and this is something that should be kept. And for the focus on shovel-ready projects, these are currently concentrated in cities. Historically, Black and brown people were federally segregated into cities, And it's a little concerning that there aren't more shovel-ready projects, especially affordable housing, sometimes subsidized in our suburbs. And I know we're addressing that via legislation, but there's children right now sleeping in shelters, sleeping on the street, sleeping on, their aunt or uncle's couch. There's nothing being addressed about this right now. And the costs that we think we're saving right now, we're going to be paying in special ed costs, policing, all types of things. So healthcare costs. So with childhood hunger, with childhood homelessness comes crime, there comes, impacts to education. So I would hope when we talk about financing and bonding, we're looking to immediately house families as well and what we can do right now. Because not only are our inner city municipalities suffering, but at the same time, we forget a lot about our rural counterparts who have to borrow grant writers and everything else. Not every town has a grant writer, and grants right now do make it a little bit harder for those places to access money.
You've reached your 3 minutes. Please
So
summarize.
thank you very much to the committee for allowing me to speak, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your work and your advocacy on such pivotal, important issues for the state of Connecticut, and quite frankly, for our citizenry and quality of life. And I want to commend you on your patience in sitting through this hearing, which has been somewhat extended, but so thank you. And we're really grateful to have you here and to have your testimony as well. And I know that you have your finger on the pulse, the legislative pulse of what goes on, and also recognize the fact that the Housing Committee, as well as finance, revenue, and bonding, a lot of the issues that you're identifying kind of overlap in those areas, as well as SDE education and the student lunch programs. And quite frankly, collectively, they can be a tsunami. And so it's very, very important that we laser focus. That is what the CIF is about. And it is not only for the big, large urban areas, as you know. So the hope is that we can move the needle and really, target those that are most in need in our cities as well. Are there comments from my colleagues or questions? Do you have anybody on the board? No. Yes, Representative Muskers.
Look, I want to thank you for your testimony. I think some of it might have either been esoteric or painful testimony that you sat through all this time. But as the Commerce Committee particularly, and dealing with the Department of Economic and Community Development, our concern is are those issues of jobs, opportunity, economic development, vibrant cities, brownfield remediation, cleaning up and making the state and ensuring its growth. So you have a commitment from us. We are here to bring things forward and to improve the quality of life.
Yes.
So
with that, I would like to mention that I was concerned about cuts for the Connecticut Care for Kids program. As well, the majority of the job losses during the pandemic happened to be women, mothers. And I believe many of them are not being counted right now because they haven't been able to find work. I myself had to go to work for, my family because I no longer qualified for FMLA. I'm the mother of a child with autism. So not everyone was as lucky as me. And there's plenty of mothers right now who are still at home, especially those who do have special needs children. So I would hope that you also reconsider any cuts to the Care for Kids program, because there's many mothers who would love to get out there and start working again and just cannot afford that childcare. And the Care for Kids program for me, my father was imprisoned for a nonviolent drug offense. So any family business started after my daughter was born. She's now a freshman in college. We were able to go from high school dropout being my parents to 4-year university in just one generation using the Care for Kids program. So I would hope that when we talk about unemployment, we don't forget about mothers who sometimes Department of Labor said made up almost the majority of job losses. So just something to keep in mind. And I hope the committee, just thinks about them as well. They seem to be a forgotten demographic here.
Well, thank you very much for that.
Yes, Senator Martin.
So is there a way of collecting that demographics?
Collecting the demographics?
Yeah, you say that, not to forget you. That demographic.
Do you want me to be honest with you? The easiest way to find them wouldn't be through Department of Education and or actually through schools, polling through schools. You've got to talk to where the kids are. So mothers aren't going to be out. They're not going to. So if you were going to collect those demographics, you have to start counting how many unemployed parents have children in school and start collecting data from there. That's how I would do it.
Yeah.
Because we can talk about dropouts from the job market, how many people collected unemployment before and after.
Yeah, I'm looking for something specific. I'll just give you some example. So we know that 30% of our students that graduate do not go on to higher ed or into the military. So that's a sort of a pool of individuals that we can help train and get them into some type of program and connect them with some jobs, right?
Oh, yeah, trade
then-
is very
And then
undervalued here.
there's another pool of people that are on state benefits, federal benefits, that we can help by bridging them to a job. But the moment they make over X, they lose those benefits. So we need to work at finding and building that bridge to that job that will make sure that those health benefits are included in that job or whatever it may be, right? So or it could be health, housing, etc. And the last pool of people, and there's more, and I'm trying to identify them as we try to figure out to the development of workforce of the workforce, because there's 100,000 jobs out there that we're told about. 30,000 are unemployed, and then if you add in those that maybe have exhausted their unemployment benefits, that number could be close to 70,000 or 75,000 people, and we still have 25,000 jobs still available. So for me, it's like what pools of people or demographics are out there, 30% that can what pool of or demographics are out there that we can encourage and train for a job. So the 30%, those that are on the benefits, those that are incarcerated as well, that's another pool that there maybe a year to go, maybe 3 years to go. And if we can help them get this training, connect them with a job. And now today you just identified perhaps another group. So that's why I was asking, gee, is there a list? Is there somewheres where we can collect them and then help them and find out how we can connect them to a job? That's all I was trying to get to.
So the way that my sister is looking for a job for about 3 years. She was laid off right before the pandemic, and she actually ended up working at her kid's school. She was lucky enough to be offered the position when there was the availability. She didn't have to apply. Not as many other parents are not as lucky. I guess if you were going to be targeting that demographic, something has to be addressed about the fiscal cliff. So so $5 can be the difference between food stamps and no food stamps. And, this is something that we know. I would guess that there would be some sort of step down from that fiscal cliff so that people can transition into becoming taxpayers, because the goal is to create a society of taxpayers and for us to be able to take care of those who may be disabled. So that's
Absolutely.
the ideal society.
Yeah,
that's what we're working
that's- yeah,
towards.
We want productive individuals, but
Yeah.
thank you. All right.
Thank you, Senator Martin. And I just want to mention, you're absolutely right with regard to the demographics with women in the workplace. The pandemic hit everybody, but women have been bore the brunt of it. And so the numbers will bear that out. Pre-COVID, women were the majority in the workplace, over 50%, approaching 60%. Drastic drop after COVID for a number of reasons to below 50% in the workforce. It is a goal of this legislature and this administration. The Commerce Committee, in fact, had tasked the relative departments to put together a strategy upon bringing women back into the workplace, this post-pandemic work environment that we are in right now. The results of all of that is that the governor's office has stood up a blue ribbon commission, which is now working diligently, great representation from all sectors around the table to put together a very viable plan to target and bring women back into the workplace, recognizing the time that they may have lost in terms of earning ability and also career mobility. I want to recognize right now my colleague, Senator Marilyn Moore, our Senate Chair of the Bonding Subcommittee. Senator Moore.
Thank you. I want to thank the young woman who just gave the testimony, very extensive on a lot of areas, and she's right on point. I mean, and it's stuff that we know. I just want to speak on the housing piece about so many of our kids are sleeping in cars that are in college and couch surfing, that we're trying to address some of those things in legislation. But there's a lot of work that has to be done to address right now. Some of the legislation we're putting forth will talk about the future. I know it takes between 2 and 5 years to develop housing. So we've got to do better at doing more right now for people who are experiencing homelessness, but also who have seen their lives change because of COVID and other situations within their own families. I want her to know that it did not fall on deaf ear. And I appreciate her staying to give that testimony, because she's covering a multitude of ills that we're all experiencing in all of our neighborhoods. And I wanted to thank her for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Moore, and thanks for being with us. Are there further questions from colleagues, remote or in person? Seeing none, I want to again thank you, Ivelisse, for being here and also for the work that you're doing. And if there are no other individuals signed up for the public speaking part, I will declare this hearing adjourned. Thank you all for being with us, especially on this Friday afternoon.